In the aftermath of George Floyd's death, there were two separate autopsies conducted. The official one, performed by Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office, conducted by Dr. Andrew Baker, and a second, hired autopsy commissioned by the Floyd family, performed by Dr. Michael Baden and Dr. Alicia Wilson. These two autopsies reached notably different conclusions, and the distinctions between them are absolutely critical for understanding the miscarriage of justice in Chauvin's case. The most explosive part of the autopsy, and the part that has been most aggressively downplayed by the media, is the toxicology report. The official autopsy found multiple drugs in Floyd's system at the time of his death, at 11 nanograms per milliliter. Norfentanil at 5.6 nanograms per milliliter, a form of that had already been partially metabolized by Floyd's system. 4-ANPP at 0.65 nanograms per milliliter, another related compound. Methamphetamine at 19 nanograms per milliliter. Various cannabis compounds like THC. Let's focus on the levels for a moment, 11 nanograms per milliliter. Dr. Baker disclosed on his witness statement for the trial that, quote, if Floyd were found dead at home alone and no other apparent causes, this could be acceptable to call an OD overdose. Baker also noted that deaths have been certified as overdoses with levels as low as 3 nanograms per milliliter. Floyd's level was nearly 4 times that amount. Also central to the report is the shocking condition of George Floyd's swollen lungs, which weighed 2 to 3 times their normal weight due to fluid accumulation caused by the toxicity. According to CDC guidelines, routinely triggers pulmonary edema, quote, significantly reducing respiratory function and leading to hypoxia. Baker testified that Floyd's lungs contained serous fluid, which is consistent with drug-induced pulmonary failure, not physical trauma. Floyd's potentially lethal level of in his system, along with methamphetamine, created an extremely dangerous combination that can cause respiratory depression, cardiac arrhythmia, and sudden death. In stark contrast to the official findings, the autopsy commissioned by the Floyd family reached very different conclusions. This examination was performed by Dr. Michael Baden, a former New York City chief medical examiner, and Dr. Alicia Wilson, a pathologist from the University of Michigan. We should pause here to talk about Dr. Michael Baden, the so-called celebrity pathologist who performed the independent autopsy for the Floyd family. Baden has made an entire career out of contradicting official autopsy findings in politically charged cases. It's essentially his brand at this point. Let's look at his track record. In 1978, he served as chairman of the House Select Committee on Assassination's Forensic Pathology Panel investigating JFK's assassination, where he contradicted key aspects of the original Warren Commission findings. He was involved in reviewing evidence in the MLK Jr. assassination. He testified for the defense in the O.J. Simpson trial, disagreeing with the prosecution's timeline. In the Michael Brown case, he claimed shots were fired from further away than the official autopsy indicated. And the cherry on top, Dr. Michael Baden was also hired by the Epstein family to conclude that Jeffrey Epstein did not die by suicide, but homicidal strangulation. Baden has literally been fired twice from medical examiner positions, one as chief medical examiner of New York City after complaints about sloppy record keeping, poor judgment, and lack of cooperation, and then again from running Suffolk County's medical examiner's office. New York Magazine skewered Baden for his disconnect between his fame, which he loved to discuss, and his accomplishments, which paled in comparison to his fame chasing. Dr. Baden and Dr. Wilson determined that Floyd died from asphyxia due to neck and back compression. They claimed that pressure on Floyd's neck impaired blood flow to the brain, while weight on his back impeded his ability to breathe. Most controversially, they stated that Floyd had no underlying medical problems that caused or contributed to his death. They came to that conclusion without access to the toxicology reports, tissue samples, Floyd's medical records, or the body cam footage. So when their findings completely contradicted the official autopsy, should we really be surprised? Moreover, Dr. Baden's report ignores the heart disease documented in the official Hennepin County autopsy. Dr. Baden went so far as to say, quote, I wish I had the same coronary arteries that Mr. Floyd had that we saw at the autopsy. That is an astonishing claim, given that the official autopsy found Floyd's coronary arteries 90% blocked and 2 others 75% narrowed. Excited delirium syndrome, recognized by the American College of Emergency Physicians in a 2009 report, is characterized by a combination of delirium, agitation, and hyperadrenergic autonomic dysfunction, also known as the flight or fight response, which typically occurs in the context of drug use or serious mental illness. During Chauvin's trial, defense attorney Robert Paul questioned Dr. Baker extensively about his experience with excited delirium. Baker acknowledged he had listed this condition as a cause of death on some death certificates during his career, but he didn't include it in his report on Floyd. Floyd exhibited several signs consistent with excited delirium during his encounter with police: agitation, paranoia, strength that required multiple officers to restrain him, sweating, and statements indicating perceptual disturbances. Combined with the known presence of methamphetamine and in his system, these behaviors raised serious questions about whether excited delirium played a role in his death. In the months following Floyd's death, one of the Minneapolis Police Department's grand gestures indicating their commitment to police reform included the removal of excited delirium from its training documents altogether. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune reported that the term excited delirium was crossed out in Minneapolis Police Department training PowerPoint slides, replaced with severe agitation with confusion, and in parentheses, delirium. a clear political revision of a medical condition that had been recognized for decades. We'll get to the rest of this story momentarily. First, the IRS is ramping up its enforcement efforts in 2025. With April 15th approaching, time is now running out. If you're facing back taxes or unfiled returns, delaying action only compounds the problem. Every day you wait makes your tax situation more difficult to resolve. Do not let another tax deadline pass you by. While taking immediate action is crucial, attempting to deal with the IRS alone can be a costly mistake. This is where Tax Network USA's expertise becomes invaluable. What sets them apart? Well, unlike other tax resolution firms, Tax Network USA maintains privileged access to the IRS through their preferred direct channels. This means they know exactly which agents can help resolve your case effectively. Whether you owe $10 grand or $10 million, their team of attorneys and negotiators brings proven strategies to settle your tax issues favorably. With over $1 billion in tax debt already resolved, they have the experience and the expertise to handle your situation. Talk with one of their strategists today. It's free. Stop the threatening letters. Stop looking over your shoulder. Protect yourself from property seizures and bank levies. Do not let the IRS control your future. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro. April 15th is just around the corner. Act now before the IRS acts first. Another finding from the autopsy that has received almost no attention is that Floyd tested positive for COVID-19. A post-mortem nasal swab confirmed Floyd had COVID-19 at the time of his death. Floyd had previously tested positive on April 3rd, 2020, approximately 7 weeks before his death. While the autopsy notes that this most likely reflects asymptomatic but persistent positivity from previous infection, the potential impact of COVID-19 on Floyd's cardiac and respiratory function, especially given severe underlying heart disease, can't be dismissed. It's also important to note the Department of Justice had the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's official autopsy results reviewed by the Office of the Armed Forces Medical Examiner, who agreed with Dr. Baker's official findings. However, they added that the police's, quote, subdual and restraint had elements of positional and mechanical asphyxiation. This additional comment introduces yet another potential mechanism of death, positional asphyxia. In other words, the position of the body prevents adequate breathing. The concept of positional asphyxia is complex and controversial in forensic medicine. It's typically diagnosed by excluding other causes of death, rather than by identifying specific physical findings. In Floyd's case, given his severe heart disease, drug intoxication, and the stress of the encounter, attributing his death primarily to positional asphyxia requires making assumptions that are not supported by the physical evidence. Let's go back to those findings, which deserve more detailed examination. Is an extremely potent synthetic opioid, estimated to be 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. It is a central nervous system depressant that can cause respiratory depression, hypoxia, and death. The concentration of in Floyd's blood was 11 nanograms per milliliter. Studies of related deaths have found that post-mortem blood concentrations can range widely. Levels above 3 nanograms per milliliter are potentially lethal. Dr. Baker's comment to federal investigators that Floyd's level could constitute an overdose, quote, if you were found dead at home alone and no other apparent causes, is extremely significant. While Baker qualified this by saying, quote, I am not saying this killed him, the statement acknowledges that the concentration in Floyd's blood was, in isolation, potentially lethal. The combination of with methamphetamine creates what's known as a speedball effect. The stimulant, methamphetamine, masking some of the depressant effects of the opioid until the stimulant begins to wear off. At that point, the respiratory depression from the opioid can suddenly become overwhelming. This dangerous combination increases the risk of cardiac arrhythmia and sudden death. Given all these medical factors, let's consider the legal standard that should have been applied in Chauvin's trial: proof beyond a reasonable doubt. For a conviction on second-degree murder, the prosecution needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Chauvin's actions were a malicious causal factor in Floyd's death. As Coleman Hughes has pointed out in his analysis of this case, there were two different theories of what caused Floyd's death: the positional asphyxia theory and the adrenaline surge theory. As a juror, if you have two reasonable explanations for cause of death, one of which implicates the defendant and one of which does not, you are supposed to acquit. It is impossible to discuss this case without acknowledging the enormous political pressure surrounding it. The death of George Floyd sparked nationwide protests and riots. Politicians, including President Biden and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, made public statements suggesting Chauvin's guilt before the trial even began. Dr. Baker testified that he and his staff received hundreds of harassing and threatening phone calls after Floyd's death. This intense pressure creates a context in which maintaining scientific objectivity can certainly become challenging. Well, that's all for now, folks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts down below. Be sure to check out all of the other great content on my channel. I'll see you here next time.